Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all.
It's Ramadan, now I got a plan before it's come and gone. Getting close to Allah, spend a lot of time. See the condition of my heart like a son and grandpa. Everybody knows we got to fast, but does everybody know how the time is passed? Is it sleeping all day and the night's a blast, and forgetting the reward in the month is past? I know you gonna wake up right, drinking water, maybe being pie, praying at sunrise, fasting the day.
Welcome to another week of the YFactor, listeners.
Today is Thursday, the 18th of Ramadan, or the 18th of August.
Depending on when you started.
And it's the third week of the YFactor Ramadan special.
Alhamdulillah, we're in the days of forgiveness. So, as we've been hearing on the SMY episodes, mashallah, it is the time to ask for forgiveness, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most forgiving. But what we thought at the YFactor was this week, Ramadan is always about empathy, and that's how we usually convey it to non-Muslims. Like when they ask us, why do we fast? A major part of explanation is explaining that we like to feel how the poor people feel and the disadvantaged and how we're so privileged, etc. But we thought, as Australian Muslims, especially as young Australian Muslims, we tend to forget the communities within Australia that actually require our empathy.
Oh, absolutely. I think we always, every single year, have a massive emphasis on international relief, like supporting Palestine, supporting Southeast Asian countries, and
even the mashayikh, mashallah, in the dua, in witr prayer, always have those very, very emotive du'as. And now we're not undermining these causes, and mashallah, they're very legitimate, and it's wonderful to know, for example, in this Ramadan, there was a high emphasis on Somalia and the drought there, and a lot of du'as and things like that.
And the massacres in Syria and so forth. But the thing is, when you look closer to home, there are communities within our Muslim community that require our empathy and solidarity, and we don't really tend to offer them that. I mean, for example, there's the refugees in Villawood Detention Centre or in the various refugee centres throughout Australia. While they're obviously fed their basic meals in the refugee centres, it's things like feeling that the Muslim community actually cares, that there's someone out there who, can check in on them. And, it's not about monetary donations. It's things like, can you go and pay them a visit? It makes them feel so much better. Or sending them, home-cooked meals for Iftar, because I know in Villawood, for example, they only serve their meals at set times. Like, it's when it's dinner, that's when they'll get served. And if dinner's not at 5:20 or whenever the Maghreb Adhan is, then they're not going to eat until then. So, we've got community initiatives like, for example, this Ramadan, and we'll talk about this later, but Mission of Hope, for example, organised for every day of Ramadan that someone sends through Iftar for the Muslim refugees in the detention centre. And they don't stand alone. There's also, for example, the Indigenous Muslim community. They do not receive enough attention from the larger Muslim community in Sydney, right, Tasnim?
Not just that, but even the mainstream society, they're pretty marginalised and stuff. We thought this episode, inshallah, will be about empathy with those, closer to home. Yeah.
And we are actually going to be speaking to an Indigenous Australian Muslim in today's episode to sort of get a little bit of an idea of how things are for her as an Aboriginal and a Muslim, and maybe give us all a little bit of an insight into their daily lives and help us, reach that level of empathy that we should attain, inshallah, especially during the month of Ramadan.
Okay, so before we get cracking on the show, just like to remind you guys, inshallah, our Facebook page is still there. So if there is, for example, or you're aware of or, know about a community, a disadvantaged Muslim community in Australia, not disadvantaged per se, but some pocket that requires our empathy, let us know your views on the YFactor page, and it would be really good if we can actually, support and vocalize their cause.
Absolutely. And of course, if you're not operating on Facebook because you've decided to deactivate it during Ramadan, or you just don't like using it in general, or you've transferred to Google+, then we do have an email, and that is yfactor@live.com.au.
So with that, we'll just take a short break and we'll be right back with you guys and the first interview.
The YFactor.
Tick-tock, it's here again. Tick-tock, Ramadan. Tick-tock, it's here again. Tick-tock, Ramadan. It's Ramadan. I'm so excited. I've waited too many days for Ramadan to come again and fill my life with love and grace. I can't believe it. Thank God I get one more chance to make it right this Ramadan. I'm gonna try my best to change. I've lost my way, too many twists and turns. I've complicated my faith, I need to make a return.
Welcome back from the break, guys. As we mentioned earlier, this episode, inshallah, is about empathy. And the first thing we'd like to start off with is the Indigenous Australian community, and more specifically, in our case, the Indigenous Australian Muslim community. As mentioned, like, subhanAllah, they have it really hard because not only do they have to deal with the negative repercussions received by them from the wider society, but as Muslims, like, it feels like we don't actually, we're not very sensitive to their plight and what they actually have to go through on a daily basis.
And even on the face of it, kind of seems like they're a double minority,
That's right.
in terms of social justice issues.
That's right. So earlier this week, Miran actually caught up with Eugenia Flynn, who is the general manager of an Indigenous youth performing arts company, and she's also the deputy chair of the National Indigenous Youth Movement of Australia. Now, mashallah, Sister Eugenia is a very active member of the Indigenous community, and she happens to be Muslim, and this is what she had to say.
The YFactor.
Joining us on the line from Melbourne is a young Indigenous Australian named Eugenia Flynn. Assalamu alaikum, Eugenia, and welcome to the YFactor.
Walaikum salam.
How's Ramadan going for you so far?
Alhamdulillah, it is going well. Just trying to do some good deeds and all that sort of thing. I actually moved to Melbourne, so it's kind of my first Ramadan away from Adelaide, where I've been since I converted.
And it must probably get really hot in Adelaide, so shorter fasting times here?
Yeah, it is. It's definitely shorter in the eastern states, that's for sure. Yes, because now it's in the middle of winter. It's very different to when I first started doing Ramadan.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. I know people overseas are complaining about the extended hours and the heat, but we've got it lucky this year, alhamdulillah.
Yeah, alhamdulillah.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm an Aboriginal woman. My family's originally from the Northern Territory, so Larrakia and Tiwi language groups, and moved to Adelaide before I was born, so that's where I've been most of my life. And yeah, just recently moved across to Melbourne, and I reverted to Islam close to 9 years ago when I was at uni.
Okay, so you met some Muslim students at uni, was that how it went?
Actually, I knew a Muslim family from high school, and they kind of introduced me to Islam.
Alright, well, when you reverted, what were the challenges that you found you faced, not only as a new Muslim, but also as an Indigenous Muslim?
I think for me, because I'm very, my cultural background is very based in being an Aboriginal person, and so I think for me it was very difficult because I was around all of these people that had a very different culture to me, and I'm not talking about Islamically, those things I could deal with, but it was a lot of the cultural things that I found very challenging. So it's been a very long process for me to kind of feel really comfortable as an Aboriginal person whose faith is Islam, kind of trying to live in both of those worlds, I think has been very challenging for me personally. I know for a lot of people it's not very challenging. I think also because Islam, take for example Ramadan, it's very family oriented. And I think this is the same for a lot of converts, not just for Aboriginal people, but if you don't have a family, if you haven't, gotten married as soon as you reverted and, have all of the family lifestyle, it can be very lonely. So, there are a few different programs out there about welcoming reverts into your home during Ramadan because it is quite difficult for us. But I guess, as an Aboriginal person, it is a lot about those cultural things, and it's not something, I made the decision that I wasn't going to give up a lot of that stuff. I think a lot of people really pressured me to become either very Arab or to become, very Indian or stuff that was familiar to them. They felt that that's what I needed to do. Oh, how can you do you still live at home? People were very shocked that I still lived with my family, I needed to give them up in order to become a Muslim because they weren't Muslim, or I needed to give up, oh wow, so you still spend time with Aboriginal people, do you? Because I still, a lot of my work revolves around working in Aboriginal communities, and I think a lot of people were very shocked by that and still are sometimes. So, yeah, it can be quite different.
You mentioned your family. How did they handle the idea of you becoming a Muslim?
Yeah, my family, I think, were a little bit shocked and surprised. I actually reverted and told them afterwards, which is probably not the best way to go about it in my circumstance. But, you know, alhamdulillah, that's what Allah willed for me. So it's very... it was a bit of a difficult time, but I took things very slowly. So I didn't wear hijab straight away, and, you know, I would pray kind of in secret and stuff. And then one day I had a conversation with my mum, who I still lived with, and said, I really want to start, like, about 2 years later, I'm still committed to this. You know, it wasn't just a phase like you thought it might be. And I really do want to, you know, I want to be able to fast freely, like, you know, in front of you, and I want to be able to pray and that sort of thing. So she was really open to that. And then about another 2 years after that, I decided that I really wanted to wear hijab. And I talked it over with my family, and they said, look, we don't necessarily agree, but we support you. So it's much, much better now. But it's a kind of strange transition time for everybody.
Well, I mean, a lot of the time you hear about Indigenous people who become Muslims, and sometimes they tell you, you know, we have some commonalities in the original, like, Aboriginal culture, but at the end of the day, when you look at it, it still seems like they're two distinct cultural sets, I guess you could say. So how do you reconcile things like the dream time and Aboriginal culture in general with Islam and what comes with it?
I mean, Islam is my religion first and foremost, and I try my very hardest. You know, Allah knows best about whether I'm getting it right or not. I try very hard to make sure that I don't do anything that goes against Islam that could be construed as shirk. So that's very important to me in terms of the way that I live my life. But I still maintain that, you know, where possible I can fit Aboriginal spirituality, which comes from the dream time, where that matches and fits with my Islamic faith, then that's what I'll do. I'll make sure that those things fit together. A lot of the other cultural aspects to being an Aboriginal person, I still do. I don't find those contradictory. That's how I live my life culturally. I am an Aboriginal person. That's never going to change. Not something I want to change, and it's just not something I can change. It's just who I am. So those things I hold on to very dearly, and I find mostly that they fit, but obviously where things don't fit, I take the lead from Islam first.
That makes sense. Do you have any examples of things from, like, spiritual things from the dream time, like you just mentioned, that are actually things you can carry on with Islam?
The knowledge of having a creator and what that means, and that we come from, you know, a creator who actually created us. And I think kind of, you know, there's things like in Islam we believe that, you know, you come from the earth, and that, you know, from Allah we come into Him in return. That concept about the land, you know, Aboriginal people have a very similar concept of custodianship. So, you know, it doesn't belong to us, but we're custodians over it. That's the exact same thing in Islam. So just little things like that.
The YFactor.
I had a question which might be slightly ignorant from a listener.
That's okay.
You know how the didgeridoo is women are not allowed to play it? Does that change when you become a Muslim? Do you set that rule aside?
Look, I think, does it change? I think it depends on about whether you believe it or not. The reason for Aboriginal women not playing the didgeridoo is because it's a spiritual and a cultural belief that it's for men only, and that, you know, in a lot of different areas, not all of them, that, you know, you might fall pregnant, or that something bad might happen to you. I think as a Muslim person, it's about having respect. And it's about going, I don't necessarily believe in that, because everything comes from Allah, and I don't, you know, I think that might be skirting around shirk there. It's about going, I don't necessarily believe that, but out of respect for these people's culture and belief, I'm not going to touch it, and I'm not going to play it. It's exactly the same as, you know, non-Muslim people not being allowed to go to Mecca, for example. And it's like, they might not believe that that's okay, but they should respect it.
Okay.
They should respect that rule even if they don't believe in it.
So even if you don't necessarily believe in some of these things from your culture, you'll still uphold it out of respect?
Yeah, I definitely do.
Do you feel that Indigenous people in general are not paid enough attention by Muslims, their Muslim counterparts, or that they are underrepresented, or that as, I guess Muslims are considered a bit of a minority group? Do you think that perhaps we should actually be more supportive of Indigenous rights?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there should be a lot more solidarity. I think particularly considering that Islam talks about justice, and there's a lot of injustice that goes on in this country, and I think what a lot of Muslim people who aren't Indigenous to Australia need to understand is that they're kind of here, there's a term of off the backs of blacks.
Oh, yeah.
And what that means is that there's another term that a lot of Aboriginal people talk about, which is the Commonwealth is really a stolen wealth.
Mm-hmm.
So when you come here and you enjoy this country and you enjoy having a job and all of the stuff that living in Australia offers you, what people need to understand is that that comes from the dispossession and the genocide and the stealing of Aboriginal people's lands. So I think that that's something that's very important. I think particularly with the Palestine issue, I think that a lot of Muslim people, for some reason, some people do understand, but there's a lot of people that don't understand there are commonalities between those two causes.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think there's a lot of improvement that can happen within the Muslim community. I think to think more about, well, what does it mean to live in Australia?
Mm-hmm.
And, quite often see a lot of Muslim people who are really gung-ho about going, I'm Australian, and, they don't want to rock the boat. And, that's the same with a lot of different migrant communities that aren't Muslim as well. They don't want to rock the boat. So they go with the status quo, which is the white majority. And I just think that for Muslims, because there is the religious imperative to be on the side of justice,
mm-hmm.
and because Muslims are supposed to have a moral upper hand, because Islam gives us that they probably shouldn't, you can't just fly under the radar. You have to actually work towards alleviating injustice.
Yeah, absolutely. Even at all the Palestine rallies, there's always an Indigenous speaker, not necessarily Muslim, but because there is, like you mentioned, definitely parallels between the Palestinians being displaced from their land and the Indigenous peoples being displaced from Australia. But I don't think that the Muslims tend to draw the parallels, or at least take it on as enough of a cause for solidarity, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah, I think there's a very core group, particularly amongst the younger set. There's definitely been a change, even in the last 9 years that I've been a Muslim. There's definitely been a change, I think, in the way that Muslim people think about being in this country. I guess because I reverted just after September 11. So everybody was in this kind of, we need to prove that we're just like you. I think everybody was in that mode. And I think for me, watching the discrimination, watching what was going on, reminded me exactly of what Aboriginal people went through years ago when I was, a little kid, even before that, my parents' era, all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been interesting to watch, I think, the Muslim community mature a little bit as people, there's more and more Muslims that are born here and more Muslims that, kind of are creating their own Australian Muslim identity, and what does that mean? And it doesn't mean that we have to prove that we can wear Australian flag hijabs and we can eat meat pies and go to the football, stuff like that. That stuff, to me, just seems really juvenile. But, yeah, I think we can move beyond that. And how do Muslims now engage in the politics? How does the Muslim community mature and start to really form their own Australian Muslim identity? And what does that actually mean?
Yeah, well, I guess the identity issue is really the crux of it for the Muslim society. And I mean, Indigenous society was struggling with that for a very long time. But I think it's like you say, we definitely should be progressing by now. And if we're still standing here thinking what our identity is, it's going to be definitely a big hindrance towards progress.
Yeah, definitely think it's limiting towards progress. And I think, what you said just before about, Indigenous people dealing with identity issues and Muslim people dealing with identity issues, the reason why Indigenous people and Muslim people as well now have had to deal with these these identity issues is because people are questioning our identity and they're trying to force an identity upon us. So it's very, I think that's the thing about going, well, hang on a minute, I'm not going to respond to what you think that I should be or how you want me to be. I'm going to create my own identity, and that's important.
Exactly, rejecting the labels that are imposed upon us and coming up with our own labels, although I don't really see why we should have any. But I guess that's just society. You always have to have a branding on everything.
Yeah.
The YFactor.
I think it's a lot to do with being a revert, and I know that there are a number of Aboriginal people that have actually been born into Muslim families. I know quite a few of them, but I guess the majority of us are still reverts, and it is a struggle, and this is the same for all reverts, I think, is that it's not easy, and you will go backwards and forwards. And I think one of the things about a lot of Aboriginal people is that we are sort of struggling between these two worlds, and so there is that added edge of it not being particularly easy. There might be some people that are struggling with substance misuse, or there might be people that they already have families and kids, and how do they deal with their partners and their spouses not being Muslim, that sort of thing.
That definitely would be a challenge if you revert to Islam and your spouse or partner is still not. They'll probably just add to the challenges and the tension.
Yeah. And I mean, that's not necessarily unique just to Aboriginal people.
Of course,
I think it's a challenge that all reverts face. And I think the number one thing that, particularly me, when I became a Muslim, I felt like telling people to relax. Just relax. I mean, the first time I ever went to a mosque, I wasn't a Muslim. And it's when I was thinking about becoming a Muslim. And I went to the mosque, it was during Ramadan, and it was during Tadaweh prayer. And I, wasn't wearing hijab, wasn't praying, and the Imam's wife wanted to kick me out of the mosque.
Oh.
And it was just, I was lucky and fortunate enough to have friends there that were like, she's not a Muslim, and, this isn't exactly the best way to introduce her to Islam.
Yeah, it's not very conducive to dawah.
Sort of thing. So I think it's, it's about being open and about cutting people some slack, I think, a little bit.
Well, how do you deal with those Muslims who hold the typical stereotypes like, they're just living off welfare, or, the labels petrol sniffers? I mean, I'm pretty sure I'm sorry, but I've heard that myself from people in the Muslim community, and it's incredibly insulting to hear it.
I mean, it's really difficult, and I guess that's the thing about not wanting to rock the boat and trying to take on, well, okay, so white people are up at the top, and this is what white Australia tells us that Aboriginal people are like, and to kind of get myself in with them, I'm going to dump on the people below me. That's definitely not just Muslims that do that. I mean, lots of migrant communities also participate in that sort of thing. It's really infuriating, and it makes me really upset. Really, really, really upset. And I have spent a lot of time trying to kind of, talk that over when I give speeches or talks or when I write pieces. I definitely talk about that sort of racism. I'm really kind of cocooned in a way that I don't experience that as much as I used to. I've found my little niche of Muslim people that I'm friends with and I hang out with, and they're very similar-minded, and they really support me as an Aboriginal person in my struggles for freedom in this country.
But what did you do in the face of that?
That sort of stuff really shocks me. I usually just responded and kind of, well, no, that's not true, and that sort of thing. And there's usually other Muslims that go, well, hang on a minute, brother, sister, you're actually completely wrong, which is nice. But it hurts, and there was a campaign that the Australians for Native Title and Reconciliation ran that was called Racism Makes Me Sick. And it talked about the actual health ramifications for people when they are faced with racism on a day-to-day basis, and that it actually does cause, depression, high blood pressure, all those sorts of things, and how it can actually affect you, and I could feel my blood pressure boiling when people say stuff like that, because it's not true, and it's really rude. And I think it's about calling Muslim people to account and saying, hang on a minute, you're supposed to be the ones that aren't racist. This is what Islam tells us. It's given us a framework for living, and it is about justice, and it is about not being racist, and it is about treating people with kindness and respect, those sorts of things. I mean, there's people out there that talk about how, I'm not sure if it's in Quran or Hadith, but there are instances where Islam talks about when you pray on stolen country, your prayers aren't accepted. So I think, there's people that talk about that sort of thing. And there's other people that talk about, well, in Islam it tells us that when you go to enter someone's home, you have to knock before you enter. I'd like to know who knocked before they came to Australia. That sort of thing. So I think it's really important to remind Muslims of those sorts of things. And even just the most basic, hey, we're not supposed to be racist.
Yeah, exactly.
And just those really basic things. I think it's definitely partly an East Coast thing when Muslims are really, what experience do they have of Aboriginal people? I don't know many Aboriginal people that actually sniff petrol in Redfern. I don't think that actually happens. It actually happens in remote areas in Central Australia.
No, but I think you're right. We don't have much...
I don't think any of those people have ever been there.
Yeah. No, I don't think we actually have much exposure to Indigenous people on a one-on-one basis. I mean, like, throughout school, you might have had the occasional speaker come in and tell us about Aboriginal rights, but I don't think that most Muslim Australians actually have a friend who is Indigenous or an acquaintance or anything. So it probably does stem largely from ignorance, really, and being fed whatever from the media or...
Yeah, and I think this is the unfortunate thing, and this goes back to the point I was making earlier, is that a lot of Muslims, because they're on the back foot and they want to assimilate, they want white Australia to pat them on the head and say, it's okay, you can be here, we're not going to harass you anymore. So they dump on the people below them. They take on the values of white oppression and say, okay, yep, we're going to dump on Aboriginal people and I'm going to believe everything you say and I'm not going to investigate for myself and I'm just going to believe that. So I think, it is about Muslim people taking on some level of responsibility, because I've had a number of Muslim people go, oh, well, I don't know, Muslims don't know Aboriginal people, so it's okay, what kind of an excuse? And it's like, well, don't you think that maybe Muslim people should actually stop and think and learn about it, or go, hey, actually, I'm going to actively seek out how I can learn, how I can contribute to the cause, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's really important as well, because I mean, I have given talks where people have said, oh, well, people say that sort of stuff because they don't know any Aboriginal people. That might be a reason, but it's not an excuse.
Yeah. Well, with that, do you have any final words for our listeners?
Ramadan Mubarak. That's about it, really.
Ramadan Mubarak to you as well, Eugenia. Thank you very much for joining us on the YFactor today, and we wish you a very happy rest of Ramadan.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The YFactor.
This Ramadan, I'm gonna do my best to get back to the basics of my Deen. If you know what I mean, uncomplicated and embrace it. Keep it simple to the point. We want it right, we want it now, the way Islam was meant to be. This Ramadan, I'm gonna do my best to get back to the basics of my Deen. If you know what I mean, uncomplicated and embrace it. Keep it simple to the point. We want it right, we want it now, the way Islam was meant to be.
Now, Tasnim, do you remember a few weeks ago before Ramadan we were talking about the Open Home Ramadan project, where basically a Muslim family would invite non-Muslims over for Iftar and tell them a little bit so that they can experience, Iftar and a Muslim Ramadan and so on. You actually attended the official launch and there were some big names there like Barry O'Farrell, for example. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that day and the project and so on?
Well, the project is run under the Islamic Council of New South Wales under the guardianship of Khalid Zakaria. So he had us, me, Mohammed and a few others on the organising committee. So we actually had the privilege of being at the launch, which was actually at his house, and his wife cooked like amazing food, and you had Barry O'Farrell and a couple of I don't know, those people in suits, the important people, and there was a couple of other people, including the principal of MacArthur Girls. There was SBS Radio. There was a journalist from Al Jazeera. There was also his neighbours, which had been neighbours with him for 60 years, right? They've been living in that same house. She's so cute. She was saying it's her marital home, and she's been living there for 60 years. And there was, the good old cousins and things like that. So it was actually packed house.
Sounds like a full house.
It was. It was actually packed backyard. It was in the backyard. And it was really lovely. Now, the aim of the initiative is, as Muslims, like, mashallah, Ramadan is, like, one of the most awesome times of the year because we always speak about having this, like, spiritual high and, like, you know, food high because you just have all the lovely food. But we don't usually open our homes to non-Muslims that need to see it, you know, firsthand. Yeah. So it was a part of the project to break down bridges and build barriers. Not build barriers. Break bridges and build...
Yeah. The other way around.
Anyway, so that was the purpose of the project. What actually happened was when we attended, Barry O'Farrell was there, and this is what he had to actually say about the project.
Hello, it's Barry O'Farrell on the YFactor. I'm here at Guildford sharing Open Home for Ramadan for the second year in a row. A great opportunity for non-Muslim Australians to understand better Muslim traditions, to understand better what Muslim families do during the month of Ramadan, and to see it firsthand. These wonderful rituals, these wonderful ceremonies, and to learn a bit more about Islam. So I remember last year, at the end of the evening, we adjourned to the lounge room. I watched live TV from Mecca, which was a real eye-opener for me. It's not a feature of the O'Farrell family.
So watch live broadcast from Mecca.
It was, you know, I'm not even sure on Foxtel I can get a live broadcast from Mecca, but
that's right.
But it was terrific to see, and I think, you know, what this does, and I hope it takes off, is promote greater understanding between different cultures. That's been the strength of this country, and I'll do everything I can to promote it.
What did you personally learn about Ramadan and Muslims in your time with mixing with Muslims?
That essentially they're no different to the rest of us. You know, we are people of faith, different faiths, but people of faith. Faith is all about setting some values, some moral concepts around our lives. It's about supporting family, and it's about doing that in different ways and respecting different faiths. So I remember last year, whether the Sheikh, whether Khaled, or whether the other guests telling me about some of the concepts of Islam, that led to greater understanding by me. I don't profess to be a religious scholar. I don't profess to be an expert, but what I know is that Muslim Australians make just as big a contribution to this country as any other Australian, and I'm here to recognise that, to recognise the need for better understanding between different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds, and to use my office to try and promote that.
We're often told that the Muslim community doesn't have a spokesperson. What would you like to become the spokesperson with this newfound knowledge?
Look, I have to say, I think that the Muslim community, like so many other communities, doesn't have a spokesman. They have many spokespeople. That's so right. There are many community groups. But look, I'm happy to be out there promoting not only greater diversity, not only greater interfaith exchange, but also greater mutual understanding. So I support a multicultural Australia. I support strongly immigration. It's been the underpinning of the success of this nation. And as long as I'm Premier, I'll continue to argue that people, wherever they come from, however they arrive, are assets.
Any concluding messages to the youth out there that are going through Ramadan at the moment, the Muslim youth?
No, just to enjoy the month of Ramadan, to enjoy their cultural background, to enjoy their faith, and to look forward to the post-Ramadan celebrations.
We'll see you there, Barry. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's what Barry O'Farrell had to say.
Well, that was interesting. Who else did you speak to on the night?
Okay, so the next person we're going to play the soundbite from is from the neighbours, right? So the ones who have been Muslim neighbours for 60 years. And I basically asked, how do you feel being here and stuff? And this is what she had to say. Pretty funny stuff.
My name is Nancy Hampton. I'm a neighbour of our lad, and he's a wonderful neighbour to me.
Why did you come to this event today?
Because he invited me over here. He's always bringing me little bits of food over to me and to try his food.
Do you like it?
Yes, I do. I love it, and I love his wife's lasagna.
We'll make sure we'll get you some more of that. Did you learn anything about Muslims and Islam in your time as a neighbour of Khaled?
Well, he comes over and talks about his religion and everything like that, and it's quite interesting because it's different to everybody, our religion. There's a lot, you do learn a lot by listening to people.
And can you tell us something about the dinner tonight? How do you feel, and what was the ambience like?
Sweets were nice. I like sweets.
Okay, your husband over here, how did you find it tonight?
Very good, an enjoyable night, and it's tribute to Alan for putting it on. It's very good. I met some people here that I enjoyed talking to.
Are you hoping that Ramadan comes more often?
Yes, yeah. When I was at work, we employed some Muslim people then, and they taught me about Ramadan. And now I'm going, I spend a lot of time in hospitals and doctors, and the drivers that take me are Muslim. He only lives just down the road, and when he takes me, we discuss religion quite a lot. And I've learnt a lot about the Muslim religion, and it's the same as ours, only put a different, everything's the same. It is all the things you should do, not steal, honour your mother and father, and all those things. It's just exactly the same as our religion.
Do you guys have any final concluding words to the Muslim community? What you want to tell them?
I just want to thank Aled and his wife particularly for all the cooking she's been doing, and I don't envy her one little bit.
Invite me next year.
We'll be there, thank you.
Well, there you go. A shout out to all you listeners out there, whoever wants to invite these lovely neighbours over for next Ramadan Iftar. They're certainly looking for hosts.
That's right. It's really funny, you know that quote, a way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Mm-hmm. I think it's just humanity in general. Like, they were there, and they were, even with Barry Farrell, I made a really inappropriate joke because I was actually giving them a tour of the food and stuff, and there was warana, mansaf, mlukhiyya, kibbeh, like the ras, like the actual, not nayir, like the actual kibbeh. And then,
the round one.
Yeah, the round one.
So all Lebanese cuisine, basically.
Yeah, but this is, so I was giving the white, quote-unquote, white people commentary on the food, right? So we get to the kibbeh, and then he's like, so I'm like, these are, grenades, it's a Muslim event. And everybody kind of just froze, and I was like, wow. Jokes. Like, seriously, that was a joke.
I can imagine the whole room. Tasnim, there are some jokes that you just don't make in front of non-Muslim people. They don't get it.
And it was really funny because I was trying to explain like the wara'inab, right? And I'm like, they're just leaves with rice. And I was like, no, like totally edible. And honestly, just thinking back on the cuisine, right? Like, all the stuff we eat is just pretty whack. But anyway,
that's interesting. Who would have even thought to put these ingredients or pieces together to come up with that food?
They loved it. They were good. And we were telling them it's a Muslim event, so you don't actually have to have like only one helping. Like, we're not keeping a tab. So they kept going for rounds. And finally, we actually spoke to the principal of MacArthur Girls. One of the most important aims of the project is people that actually have daily interactions with Muslims, right? Mm-hmm. They actually need a first-hand glimpse at what it is. And she actually says this in the interview, in the soundbite. But, in the capacity as a principal, she deals with Muslims on a daily basis. That's right. And this is what she had to say.
Hi, I'm Gail Clough. I'm the principal of MacArthur Girls High School. It was a great honour to be invited here by Mr. Sukaria and his lovely wife tonight to be part of this Iftar evening, where I believe it has enabled me to find out more and learn more about the Muslim culture. At MacArthur Girls High School we have a large population of Muslim students, and I think it's something that I'll be speaking to my staff about, that we can actually learn more about the Muslim culture, and so that we can understand what is happening and relate more to our students and be more inclusive in the way that we teach them in our classes.
The YFactor.
Well, that was very interesting. I think, Tasnim, that it's incredibly necessary for our colleagues, our neighbours, our acquaintances, anyone who's not non-Muslim in your circle of people basically. It's very important for them to experience what we go through in Ramadan firsthand, not necessarily via fasting, although I know that, for example, in the UTS Islamic Awareness Week, they had fast-a-thons happening, and some people do it voluntarily. But just for them to have a look and see, what is this Ramadan thing that we're always talking about? And sometimes it really does break down those barriers, like you were saying before, and it promotes this mutual understanding. And you never know, like, it's bonus dawah while you're at it.
Honestly, sometimes I think as Muslims, we take it for granted, these environments where we meet as families, we eat, we have fun, we enjoy. And it's not just about non-Muslims. Like, there's a lot of Muslim, for example, if they're converts or if, they're just like international students, they actually dearly miss this environment of having a family and things like that. And the other beautiful thing about Open Home, for example, just before we did Iftar, so we did the adhan went off, we had our dates, and then before we started eating, we actually got up and prayed, right? Now, Muslims, we pray 5 times a day. It's just become like brushing your teeth. Like, we don't, think twice about it. But these people, it's actually pretty shocking for them because, they see every day just like as a normal Joe Blow, like you do what they do, and then kind of seeing it for that 5 minutes where you're like, you know, disconnected from the world and you're like speaking to
yourself.
and it's a very moving experience for them
because they never witnessed the ibadah part of you being a Muslim. Like
exactly.
To them it's mostly you just look a little bit different.
Exactly.
You have different food.
That's right.
And that's
right. And at work or even at uni or at school, you know, it's really lovely for them to see that side of you. And you know, that's what breaks down the barriers. Like when it's all about, you know, appreciating that at the end of the day, you know, like we have greater truths that unite us all, you know, and it's really lovely to see that. So the Open Home Ramadan initiative is actually ongoing until the end of Ramadan, and if you are interested, as we mentioned earlier, what you can do is host a non-Muslim family to your home and then send us the at the Islamic Council, send us the pictures if you do take pictures, or just like a blog entry, and it actually goes on the website, and then that will be really good to be covered.
I think they have a Facebook group
called Open Home in Ramadan, and also if I will put the details up on the YFactor page, so if you do want to have a look at that, or if you still need more information, you can just send us an email at the YFactor at live.com.au, and I'll be more than happy to give you more information.
The YFactor.
Now, at the beginning of the episode, we mentioned the empathy for the, you know, Muslim disadvantaged within our community.
You made reference to the refugees.
That's right, not in just Villawood Detention Centre, but all the detention centres in Australia. Now, alhamdulillah, as we mentioned, thanks to Mission of Hope, they've actually been getting iftars on a daily basis out to them, and they even had like a Facebook appeal for people to sponsor or send money, and alhamdulillah, all the spots have been actually filled. You know, like subhanAllah, it's all about kind of just showing them that, look, you know what, you're not on your own. You know, we're here for you, not just through our dua, but through our presence. And you know, you don't have to, it's not a big task, like to actually be allowed in the detention centre. You actually just need to know the name of someone there, and you just rock up and they let you in and you just have a chat with them and things like that.
And you know, Tasnim, it makes such an incredible difference. I don't think even you and I, when we went to visit, I don't think we even comprehended exactly how much of a difference that made, because I mean, I was just speaking to a non-Muslim refugee activist a couple of days ago, and she said to me that when she visited the Muslim guys in there, they were telling her how they get home cooked meals every day for iftar, and how much, like she was saying to me, it made such a big difference in their spirits. Like it really boosted their spirits, and it made them feel that, you know, they're not completely forgotten even though they're locked up and isolated from society. And like, as great as it is that the spots were all filled on the Mission of Hope timetable of every day of Ramadan, we were kind of slightly disappointed because we wanted to encourage you all to send in some food as well. But there is actually another option, because although Villawood Detention Centre spots have been filled, there's also the refugees, the African Muslim refugees who are resettling in Australia. So these are the ones who've already come out of the refugee centres, but they're just trying to integrate into Australian society. Or integrate is probably not the right word
basically
to
settle
use.
into communities, you know, after having gone through that ordeal. Now,
the association taking care of this is called the Liberian Muslim Community Association, and their president, Brother Muhammad Dukley, he wrote to Mission of Hope, and this was all provided on their Facebook page as well, telling them that the community, the African Muslim community, is facing serious problems where the youth are kind of like, they have their identity issues, and there's the problem that they come from these war-torn countries with socio-cultural, socio-economic problems, and they come here and their parents are not educated, so they can't sort of give them that support of either Islamic education, general education, or, you know, like just, you know, growing up in Australia. It's such a different context and atmosphere.
And when you have the baggage of post-traumatic stress carried around with you, it's painful. So this Liman organisation is basically calling out for volunteers, is that right?
They're actually calling out for donations, because and this is not food donations, it's back onto the financial donation sector. They have very limited resources available to them that they use to try and help these youth, because I mean, like, there's one, they were saying they're growing up with no sense of who they are and they have no direction. So their resources at the moment are incredibly limited, and they would
I don't think it's just with the youth. That Brother Muhammad was speaking about how it's also for single mothers and families. And basically they have a couple of programs they're running at the moment. So the first one is actually the iftars that they're running on a daily basis, and it's through food hampers which are given to the families.
They're also running a Eid gift drive. So, I mean, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And Tasnim, yeah, you're right. You mentioned before that they're looking for volunteers. They are actually trying to set up like a database of volunteers who can help out with the identified families that are in need of support.
If you are interested, I think it's a very, very good initiative, inshallah. You can email Mission of Hope at
info@missionofhope.org.au. They've got all their bank account details there. And I think this is both a during Ramadan and post-Ramadan constructive project to be a part of.
Definitely. I think with everything we've mentioned on the show today, it's not limited to Ramadan. Obviously, Ramadan, you know, when our stomachs are hungry, our brains have more of a thinking capacity.
Everything's heightened.
That's
you feel
right.
compassion even more.
That's right. So inshallah, but these communities, it's a permanent disadvantage they face. And inshallah, if we can maintain this empathy after the month of Ramadan and be there for them as our brothers and sisters in humanity. Now, as we said earlier in the episode, it doesn't mean that international causes are any less worthy or we should not think about them. But I feel like because it's so reachable, you can do something about it. Like, I don't know, I always get very, very depressed watching the news and stuff about, you know, Gaza or Syria or Libya, because you kind of feel like, okay, you can donate, but there's nothing tangible you can do, right? So imagine with this, you're actually there in person putting hampers together, you know, actually seeing the person at the receiving end, being there for them, seeing the smile on their face. And I think, you know, subhanAllah, it makes it also worthwhile.
Of course, we're not saying that, you know, you should be working for those smiles alone. We're working for our rewards, inshallah, hasanat. But, like, it helps you stay motivated when you see that you're making a difference.
That's right.
And I think that's what it comes down to. But, you know, having said that, again, we would like to mention our brothers and sisters' plight in Syria and Libya, Yemen. Have I missed anything?
I don't know.
Palestine, of course.
Do you consider the riots in London your brothers and sisters?
Well, there were 3 Muslims killed in that, so I mean,
I think honestly, Ramadan, again, it's not about just Muslims. Empathy for humanity in general.
Absolutely.
And these crises, they don't know a name, they don't know a nationality, they don't know a religion. It's affecting people. And as Muslims, like, it was our obligation to be the best for mankind, and, you know, our mercy through our conduct, through what we have to offer, is not limited to Muslims.
I think that pretty much brings us to the end of today's episode. Please do feel free to, you know, let us know your comments and your feedback in general, even if it's just a simple Salam Alaikum. We're very happy to receive that.
And please don't forget us in your du'as. As we mentioned, today and tomorrow are the last nights of the second part of Ramadan, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is infinite in His forgiveness. Keep us in your du'a and the wider Muslim community.
And extend your forgiveness to us as well, inshallah.
If we've offended you on the show at all.
But yeah.
So from Miran and Tasnim at the YFactor, we would like to say
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.